React, something that you're commonly going to do is pass props from one component to the other. So if we look at our kind of page component here, we can see we have this component and we pass what looks like an HTML attribute, but as you're probably aware of, this is a prop. And props are great. They basically allow you to add arguments to your components, which are just kind of JavaScript functions. So it allows you to kind of customize your components a bit easier. Now, you can run into a problem with passing props. And straight from the React docs here, they mentioned that passing props is a great way to explicitly pipe data through your UI tree to the components that use it. However, it can become verbose and inconvenient when you need to pass some props deeply through your component tree. And the nearest common ancestor could be far away from the components that actually need the data. So you have to kind of lift this state really high up into your component tree and then pass your props all the way down. So in their little diagram here, sometimes say you have a component and then you need to pass a prop to this child and this child component. And I'm going to show you examples in actual code in a second. This is perfectly reasonable. This is still very manageable. You're just passing props one layer to one child and one child. But you are going to run into situations in your application where maybe you have that same sort of parent to child setup, but then you realize that, okay, well, actually, these children over here in my application also need that same state. So you end up lifting state, and then you end up having to pass it down to 1, 2, 3, kind of 4 layers deep in your application tree. And you have your state kind of spread out throughout these children. You're passing it through components that don't really need to know about that state. They're just kind of passing it through. And that starts to get much more unmanageable. And that's the whole issue with prop drilling is it becomes very inconvenient and verbose, as they're mentioning, to pass props through multiple layers. I think it also makes it really hard to kind of maintain that state when you're having to track it through several layers of your application and it's going all through your component tree. And sometimes you're even passing it into components that don't even need it. They're just kind of like pass through components, which generally can be a little tricky. So if we look at my demo application here, I have several different components to where we kind of mimic this layout right here. So if we look at the code, I have my page component and we render a hierarchy diagram, which is really just this data flow here. So you can kind of ignore that right now, but we render a grandparent component that accepts a user data prop, which is just this hard-coded user data. And if I click into my grandparent, you can see that this component, it renders 2 more components, a parent and a sibling, and it passes through more of that user data. But to the sibling, it passes the task completed prop. And if we look at my diagram, we have my dashboard, which is my grandparent component. And then it has this user roles child and this user statistics child. And then further, if we go into this parent component, it maps over and renders a bunch of different child components, which those child components are going to be these role components here. So admin, editor, and viewer. And if we further click into that, we have this data display component that is going to render the name and role of a certain user. So you can see we're passing this user data through several different layers of our component tree to where it goes from grandparent to either parent or sibling here. Sibling, it just stops here. It doesn't pass it any further, but grandparent passes it down to parent, which passes it into child, which passes it into data display. So we're kind of drilling this all the way through our application in this sort of hierarchy here. It's starting at grandparent, passes it to sibling, also passes it to parent, to child, to data display. And in our case, we still use the state in parent and in child. But if you were just needing that data in this data display component and passing it through parent and child, it kind of makes you feel like, I wish there was a better way to do this. especially if these components weren't using that state. And luckily, there is solutions to prop drilling to where you can use context in React, which is going to be probably my next video in React, or you can use some sort of like global state manager, something like Recoil or Redux, or there's several other kind of new kids on the block as well that can help you do that. And I've heard great things about. But the kind of purpose of this video is to kind of show you the issue with prop drilling, what it is, and show you an example in code. It is kind of tricky to show like a realistic example that makes it super clear why it's an issue. But in larger applications, drilling props through several different layers, passing them to siblings, it becomes very unruly very quickly, and you need to use some other solution in those cases. So hopefully this video helped you understand the problem with prop drilling, what it is, and in future videos, we'll kind of dive into more examples of how to solve the issue of prop drilling. So I hope this video was helpful, and I will see you in the next one.